Hi, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Coyne and I've got with me Jodie Deakin, and we've been tutoring in research in nursing at the Gold Coast. And we're going to break down A2 and just to help you have a little bit more understanding of what's expected, but also why you might do it. So Jodie, why might you actually look at research with this critical eye?
Especially when I'm reflecting on my own practice and wanting to do a quick snapshot of evidence or articles that may be available that can help guide the practice that I'm doing with patients in the clinical setting.
And that's why in research we have actually taught you this skill. And so for assessment 2, you're just to write a 1,200 word snapshot critical review of the articles in relation to the case study that we've presented to you. So 35%, and it's marked out of 70, and it's due in week 6. So you've got time to have a look and start really preparing this in readiness for week 6. So let's look at the actual task. And so we're providing you with a case study, which is Desiree and her diabetes, and we've also given you a reference list of relevant articles. So what you need to do, the first part, is really look through the case study and think about how you may sort of reflect with this case study and how you might think about sort of developing some recommendations. Then read through the articles, even if it's just the titles, to get a sense of which ones you really gel with. I think that's important when you're looking at this assignment, to actually not only understand the articles, but actually want to sort of read them and think about them with the case study.
That's right, Elizabeth, because you look through the 10 articles that we've supplied and a couple will automatically jump out to you, ones that you align yourself with and are interested. So we would encourage you to choose those ones that most pop off the paper to you.
Yeah. And so part 1 is really writing this annotation, and that's sort of been something that people have said, what is an annotation? An annotation is really just a real summary. And so decide on your 3 articles, and it's 200 words for each article. So the first part is putting the reference of the article at the top. And so when we're looking at the summary of the article, what sort of key points are expected that you might find in this summary?
That's a really good question there, Elizabeth. So in this first 200 word summary, what we're actually looking for are key points, including the aim, what the authors have done, and what the research is about. So what are they intending to find by doing this study? Secondly, we're looking at the methods section. Now in the methods section, you will see the design, the sample and setting, data collection, and data analysis. You'll then find the results setting, where you'll look at the findings and what did they actually find by doing this research. Importantly, when you're wrapping that up into a neat bow, you look at the discussion section. And this is really critical because this is the so what. This is how does this research align to not only established research out there, but what new things does it add and how does that apply to the clinicians in clinical practice. The other things we're looking for you to discuss is discussing the limitations of the research. And I'll just move so that you can see the article here. So limitations of the research, including method and design. Does it fit the aim? Has it fit the setting and sample? And do they align with the method?
Yeah, and this is what we've been teaching you during the semester. And so it's just important to sort of reflect back about what we identified as we went through the tutorials. So in part 2, it's really about looking at this article with your critical review and that reflective aspect of what are the strengths of this article and what sort of identifies, the quality. Now this section is 100 words justification for each of the articles you've chosen, a total of 300. So if it's not like you have to sort of have exact 100, but the main thing, this section is 300 words. And so what sort of things might you look for to identify the strengths and the quality of an article, Jodie?
So when we're looking at the strengths, you will find a heading in the article that does say strengths. So the authors will point out strengths of the article to you. We're looking at the level of evidence, and we discussed in the tutorials the level of evidence pyramids for the reflective studies, and the quality of the research article.
Yeah, and remembering to sort of look at the journal by clicking on the link, which leads you sort of to the information about the journal and its impact, and also then the authors as well. And so these are all sort of aspects that help you identify what's the strength of this article. And we've talked also about sort of justifying that the method as well, and the strength of the method, which is where Jody suggested sort of looking at those levels of evidence. Remembering that this section requires you to have some extra references. And so you might be referencing that they did the appropriate flow of design and analysis with a reference to a methodology reference or an analysis reference. You might be referencing the strengths of their intervention if you're sort of had an article that was looking at that. And so then this then is how you would then have those extra references. When you're looking at part 3, it's really about sort of back to that case study. So using the evidence from the articles, recommend ways to improve this patient's nursing care. And this is where you can actually look at that sort of critique of thinking, okay, well, what might I recommend as best practice? And how else can I sort of justify that? In this section, Jody, how do you sort of, students need to bring in extra references. So what sort of suggestions for bringing in those extra references?
Absolutely. Elizabeth, in a journal article, you will generally find an area that says translation to clinical practice or implications for clinical practice. You can go to that section of the journal article and that'll help tie that into your case study. You'll find also in the reference section of the specific journal article references they've actually used to substantiate their research. So that's often a really good place to go as well.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in the tutorials about sort of, it's not about having to sort of, go through all this searching, but about understanding what this article presents to you. So now we thought we'd actually demonstrate on 2 articles. Admittedly, we're not going to sort of write it up in length of time, but we're just going to highlight to you again sort of how you go through these articles. And it's just going to take me a minute or 2. Right.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So in this section, we thought it might be a really quick snapshot for you to run through 2 different journal articles and just highlight some key points that we're trying to establish in terms of the A2 assessment piece. And as we've been discussing in tutorial, that title page often really provides a richness of information for you to draw out. So key things are, we're looking for the name of the journal. And we can actually see on this cover page, we can't really see the name of the journal. And that's important because we want to know where it was published. We want to know impact factors and the strength of that journal. Secondly, we're looking at the heading. Is the heading catchy? Does it provide you with information about what you think this article might be about? So in this journal article, we're talking about an education intervention in hospitalised patients, and it's a before and after study. So you can assume we're talking about education and maybe pressure injury prevention, and then the authors have done a before and after study, so that gives you a bit of a snapshot into the design. Secondly, then when we look at the authors, we can see the authors listed, and this is where each journal article will actually be quite different. If you could just scroll back up, Elizabeth, sorry. Some journal articles won't have their postdoctoral or qualifications after the name. Some might have a 1 or 2 after each name to align where the institution is they work. In this journal article, you do have to go searching. Thankfully, they're in these dark green boxes. So you can see the names of the authors, their qualifications and where they work, so that you know that they are, at least experts in their field or emerging researchers in their field.
The journal name is sort of at the top here in the reference. but also down at the bottom as a header, which is great to then sort of identify where the journal is. But unlike the other journals that we've looked at in Toots, where it was very clear.
And so then you'll see the abstract, and from the abstract we can draw things such as the aim, the methods, the results, and generally conclusions. So that provides you with a good overview. And some journal articles will have the impact, like here we can see in this article, or they might be in an actual text box. So it tells us what's already known in the area and what does it add to the research. As we've been discussing in tutorials, background section really just provides an overview of why we've got this problem and where we're leading into the research. So under the method tab, you can see a broader explanation of the aim for this paper. We've then got the design, so it was a before and after setting. We've got the setting, so it tells you it was in an acute ward with hospital-based setting. You'll notice some tables.
Great figure.
Tables, so it provides a snapshot here in this article of exactly what the intervention was. So you'll have to go looking. It might be in tables or it may actually be in the text. We've got things such as the sample, okay, and then data collection methods. Importantly, we can see ethics. Now, ethics is also another explanation that can be in different places throughout journal articles as well, so be mindful to go looking for that.
And remember that's one of the strengths, that it has clearly demonstrated ethics. And then this is, again, back to sort of what you were looking at in your study.
That's right. So we've then got data analysis and how we analyse the data, and the results section. So really read through those results and provide a snapshot of what the authors have found. They'll generally, provide details around the demographic and clinical data, but then also the data that they analysed. Now here in the discussion, that's the really important bit, and that's how does this research, what did we find, how does it compare to what's already out there, and what are the key takeouts that we've found through this research. So the discussion is a really important point for you to have a look at.
And one of the things that's important in this one is that because you've got the patient's knowledge, but then you also really link to the benefits, which would be useful for then those clinical recommendations.
That's right. And you'll note throughout the discussion where key themes have emerged, the author has provided headings, so that helps link key themes as well. You'll see the strengths and limitations section. And so if we just point out a strength here, one of the major strengths was the before and after intervention was actually a validated data collection scale. So you might note something of that nature with the research you find.
And that's important to sort of look at, and then you can sort of, your reference may be even just to the textbook where you're actually referencing the benefit of using a validated survey in research.
So then you'll have the conclusion, and then sometimes things are funded through research grants. You can see there that can be a strength or a limitation depending on the type of intervention.
Yeah. And so one of the things is to sort of start to get familiar with where to find things. And we've got this in, we've done it throughout the Toots of where different aspects sit of the information within the article. And it follows a pattern. However, as you've noticed, that each journal may have particular recommendations of the way they want their set up. So this is another article where the journal is nice and clear up front, but the title doesn't really give you that clarity of what was done. And if you were critical, one might say it's actually a fairly long title. The authors with who they were and where they've come from is fairly easy to see.
Elizabeth, can I just add something there? If we go back up to the title, you will note that at the end of the title, we can't actually see what type of study it is. So you may point that out. Secondly, as we've been discussing in Toots, this one here has actually the qualifications of the authors after their name, but you will see that little green circle, so the ORCID. Now that's an area where you can go to if you're having trouble finding out their qualifications. They're generally listed in there, and that is a hyperlink within those authors' settings.
And so then it goes into the actual abstract and summary. And again, sort of the same process, different recommendations for this journal, where it wanted aims and objectives first, background, design, methods and results. And then they've got then a box for their recommendations and the strengths. One of the things with this one is that in the background, the aims sitting quite clearly there. And then in the methods, the conceptual framework. Now, we talked about that this may sit in the methods or it may also sit within the background. This one has then that sort of operational definitions as well. That actually is sitting in the background, because here's the methods here.
And if you're having trouble, if we could just go back up a little bit, if you're having trouble finding the aim and it's not clearly identified like it is in this lovely article, you may indeed find it through the end of the introduction. As a closing paragraph, the aim might be sitting in there.
Yep. And so into the methods, and we've got then the type of study, the participants, the measurements, the data collection, the statistical analysis, the ethics, and then into the results. The results should follow the same pattern as the way the measurements are set up as well. And that would be identified as a strength, because it adds easy sort of connection for the reader. As a clinician, can you comment on that, on the way, the ease of reading articles?
Yes, look, sometimes you can tell by the abstract if the article's going to be easy or not to read. And sometimes as a clinician, they can be extremely confusing. And I think that's potentially why a lot of clinicians possibly don't read research articles, because there is too much information and they sometimes can be full of statistics and they don't quite understand how that relates to clinical setting.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talked about as well is the tables. So a table should be clear. When you're submitting your research to a journal, they expect the table to be read by the people that are reading these journals, which are clinicians as well as researchers. So this is another area in the articles that you've been provided to actually comment. Does it make sense? Can you, as a clinician, understand the tables? So this one then has the tables in amongst the discussion, but that's just the way the journal has presented them. Again, the strengths and the limitations. One of the interesting things with this particular journal, it wanted the relevance to clinical practice, but it doesn't actually sort of have a clear recommendations. And so it's identifying what is the section that relates to what you wanted to find. And then onto the conclusion, acknowledgements and not funding but conflict of interest. And so it's interesting how each journal is presented in a slightly different way. So hopefully that has given you a little bit of a snapshot and just reminded you what we went through in tutorials. Start working on your A2, sort of deciding which articles you like, which you connect with, what sort of recommendations, and any questions. Just remember that we're only just on the Teams site, so put your questions through on that. Thank you.
Thank you.